The ancient forest breathed. Each rustle of the leaves, each snap of a twig beneath the paw of some unseen creature, sang a note in a symphony composed over millennia. Lyra moved with the effortless grace of a shadow. It was the twilight of the 19th century. But this part of Oregon remained untouched by the rush of industry consuming the land. 30 years had etched the lines of sun and wind into her face, but her eyes held the clear, knowing gaze of someone born of the wild. A skilled scout and naturalist, she moved on the fringes of civilization, understanding the forest as a living, breathing entity. Today, she tracked a rare white-tailed deer, every fiber of her being attuned to the woods. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rich soil and pine needles. Lyra paused, drawing a deep breath, letting the silence of the place fill her. In this moment of profound peace, a subtle shift occurred. A tremor, almost imperceptible, rippled through the earth beneath her worn boots. A deep, resonant hum vibrated far below the surface. Lyra felt the vibration more than she heard it. Just beyond her sight, a presence seemed to coalesce and then dissipate, like a breath held and released by the forest itself. The fleeting entity had no menace, but instead felt like the very spirit of the woods. A vague awareness, it was the forest's sigh, a profound and sacred exhalation. Later that day, the forest's sacred symphony began to fray. Tucked discreetly beneath a fern, an intrusion, a surveyor's mark, a thin iron rod glinting in the faded light, driven deep into the earth. Its sharp edges seemed to tear at the ancient organic fabric of the forest floor. The distant murmur that had once been the wind through the pines now carried a new, unsettling rhythm, a faint rhythmic chugging, like a giant's labored breathing, pulsed through the air. It was the unmistakable sound of a locomotive, miles away but drawing ever closer. The metallic clang of hammers, sharp and inconsistent, echoed from the same direction. It was Caleb, her younger brother, his eyes bright with an almost feverish enthusiasm. He was 20, full of the boundless energy of youth, and dressed in the sturdy, rough-spun clothes of a railway laborer. He waved, a broad, easy smile on his face, oblivious to the disquiet that had settled over Elara. "Fancy meeting you out here," he called, his voice clear and untroubled. "Still chasing ghosts in the trees?" He gestured vaguely at the deep woods. "You should come with me, see what real work looks like. They're building a world out there, Elara, a new one. Cities growing like mushrooms, opportunities everywhere. No more living off the land like savages." He spoke of progress, of modernity, of leaving the hard life behind. He held out a rough, callous hand, an invitation to a world Elara intuitively recoiled from. His enthusiasm, once endearing, now felt hollow, almost frantic, a strange echo of the distant hammers. The air hung heavy and still, thick with a thin, unnatural mist that smelled not of a damp earth and living things, but of something else, something cold and mineral. Elara stood at the edge of a newly cleared section of forest, a raw, gaping wound in the ancient landscape. A wasteland of shattered stumps, the colossal pines of discarded wood, like bones heaped in a forgotten graveyard. Beyond this devastation, twin lines of gleaming steel stretched into the distance, stark and unyielding against the churned earth. This was Caleb's world now. He stood by the tracks, his chest puffed out like a laborer's pride, gesturing broadly at the devastation. "Fastest track ever laid. We're ahead of schedule, connecting to Fort Worth. Well, everywhere. Imagine goods from coast to coast in days. People traveling like never before. This is the future." His voice was loud, almost defiant, as if trying to drown out the inherent wrongness of the scene. The fog intensified, swirling around them. It wasn't the gentle, earthborn mist Elara knew from deep in the woods. This fog had a presence, a weight to it. And then, in the shifting veil of grays, Elara saw it, a distortion, a flickering shadow, too vast to be a cloud, too solid to be a mere fog, yet too indistinct to be anything concrete. It seemed to follow the line of the track, a colossal, amorphous ripple in the very fabric of the air, stretching far into the distance. It wasn't a clear monster, not yet, but an implication of one, an immense, suffering presence, like a tear in the veil between worlds. It conveyed an overwhelming sense of power and dread. It was the very breath of the oppressive atmosphere, heavy with unspoken misery. Caleb, oblivious, just exhausts Elara, or steam from the engines. Gets thick around here with all the work. He waved a dismissive hand, turning back to point at the newly hammered spike. But Elara felt a profound sense of wrongness, a cold dread that settled deep in her bones. This wasn't progress, it was undoing. The silence of the dying trees, the metallic stench in the air, the grotesque monument of tracks stretching into the unknown, and that immense, suffering shadow in the midst. They all coalesced into a single terrifying truth. "This isn't progress, Caleb," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper against the rising wind. "This is a crime." Weeks bled into a month, then 2. Elara was back in her cabin, nestled deep in what remained of the untouched forest. But untouched felt like a cruel joke now. The sounds were muted, the vibrant cacophony of bird songs, the rustle of unseen creatures, the living pulse of the woods. All were distant echoes, replaced by a subtle, unsettling quiet. The air itself felt thin, as if the forest was slowly suffocating. Elara would spend hours trying to reconnect, pressing her ear to the moss-covered earth, touching the rough bark of ancient trees, but the vibrant life she knew seemed to have receded, like a tide pulling back from barren shore. The faint, comforting hum from her first encounter, the spirit of the woods, was now a consistent low groan that vibrated through the very ground. But it didn't sound like the wind. It sounded like it was something that tore at the edges of reality, a lament for something vast and dying. Whispers began to drift into her isolated existence. Hunters spoke of game animals behaving erratically, fleeing from unseen terrors, their eyes wide with unnatural fear. Unnatural localized frosts, sharp and biting, descended even into late spring, leaving patches of withered vegetation in their wake. Something was profoundly wrong. Then came the letters from Caleb. His handwriting, once neat and precise, grew more erratic with each missive. He spoke of the telegraph lines going up alongside the rail. He spoke of telephone lines going up alongside the rails, a new marvel connecting Portland to distant markets in an instant, the very latest in communication. But he also spoke of strange electrical surges along the lines, causing equipment to malfunction without explanation. Operators reported unsettling whispers carried on the wires, faint and indistinct voices speaking in a language no human could decipher. He dismissed it as line interference, a common enough complaint with the new technology. But Elara could read between the lines, the growing unease he tried to hide. He worked long hours, driven by a reckless, unseen force, pushing the railway ever onward. The whispers, Elara knew, were in the air, in the earth, and perhaps now in Caleb's mind. Driven by growing dread, Elara ventured deeper into the increasingly ravaged parts of the forest. The scale of destruction was now immense, horrifying in scope. Whole swaths of ancient trees, once the silent guardians of this land, were gone, replaced by scarred earth and endless, gleaming tracks that stretched backward towards the smoke-hazed horizon where the distant coastal logging towns lay. The air, heavy with the stench of coal smoke and pulverized stone, choked her lungs. The constant low groan of the land was palpable, a deep, resonating vibration that shook Elara to her very bones. A physical manifestation of the earth's suffering. The subtle shadow from her very encounter, the one that flickered in the mist, was now persistent, its form still indistinct but appearing larger, looming over the horizon, almost a part of the oppressive, smoke-laden sky. It seemed to feed on destruction. It was the destruction, an immense, living embodiment of the ongoing desecration. It was the towering spirit of the vanishing wild. Elara knelt, pressing her hand against the cold, broken earth. She closed her eyes, trying to touch the ancient connection. The earth beneath her hand felt dead, hollowed out. She understood then, with a crushing certainty, that the spirit of the wild was being killed. A slow, agonizing slaughter. This was the core tragedy. The irreparable loss of something sacred, something irreplaceable, something that once flowed through the very veins of the earth. The vast shadowy presence on the horizon was not just a terrifying anomaly, it was the accumulation of grief of the world, a silent, monstrous testimony to his unforgivable sin. The true fear lay in the monster's very existence, a perpetual wound in the fabric of reality, a chilling reminder of what was being irrevocably lost. The logging and rail hub town near Portland was a monstrous symphony of chaos and ambition. Black smoke plumed from countless chimneys, staining the sky. The air thrummed with the ceaseless clang of metal, the hiss of steam, the guttural roar of locomotives pulling in new settlers and endless supplies. New money, raw and untamed, flowed through its muddy streets, drawing men like moths to the scorched flame. Elara tracked down Caleb in a sprawling, hastily constructed office crammed with maps and blueprints for new lines stretching deeper into Oregon's vast timberlands. He had changed, gaunt, his face pale beneath a layer of grime, his eyes wide with a frantic, almost manic energy. He clutched a sheet of paper, his hands trembling slightly. "Elara, what are you doing here?" "Look at this, Elara," he exclaimed, spreading a map across a cluttered desk. His fingers traced intricate lines of proposed tracks. "We're connecting Portland to the world. No more isolation, no more hardship. This is the future." He dismissed his fear with a wave of his hand, a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Wild superstition. You've spent too much time alone in those woods, Elara. The world is moving on. You should too." His enthusiasm was too immense, his eyes too bright, almost feverish. His words flowed too easily. A mechanical litany of efficiency, connectivity, opportunity. He seemed almost an extension of the machines he operated. His own humanity, subtly eroded by the restless march of industry. He laughed, a short, nervous bark, rubbing his temples with a trembling hand. "Sometimes I dream of it, Elara. Visions, endless lines of steel, stretching into infinity, perfectly organized, bringing order to chaos." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his breath smelling of stale coffee and something metallic. "They're pushing us hard, a final push, through the last great untouched valley. Then it's done. Portland will be the heart of it all." He seemed both exhilarated and utterly exhausted, a man teetering on the precipice of something terrifying. Her brother, the bright-eyed boy who loved to skip stones in the forest stream, was gone, replaced by this ghost of a man, irrevocably lost to the siren song of iron. The last great untouched valley was a place of breathtaking, pristine beauty. Towering ancient firs and cedars, their leaves a vibrant tapestry of green, rose from the valley floor, their branches reaching toward a sky of piercing blue. A crystal clear river snaked through the center, its gentle murmur the only sound. But the air was heavy with an unnatural quiet, a premonition that sent shivers down Elara's spine. The usual symphony of forest life was absent, replaced by a profound, eerie stillness, as if the very land held its breath. This was the final untouched barrier before Portland's relentless expansion connected the vast timberlands to the coastal port and eastern markets. Train tracks, gleaming and stark, were being laid at an unprecedented, frantic pace, scaring the pristine earth. Hundreds of laborers, moving with a desperate, almost unnatural efficiency, hammered and sawed, their movements precise and relentless. The distant chugging of a locomotive was no longer distant. It was here, a monstrous presence already encroaching upon the valley's serenity. The engineers had declared a deadline, a final, unyielding date for the line to the coast to be complete, driving the men to the brink. And then he saw it, fully and undeniably, the monster. It was no longer just a shadow or a distortion. It was a colossal, indistinct entity of mist, smoke, and shattered earth, towering over the entire landscape. Its form shifted with the light, utterly immense, its ragged edges blurring into the oppressive sky. It was the physical manifestation of the wilderness's suffering and drying essence, a monumental silent scream of a violated world. It dominated the entire scene, dwarfing the trees that had previously seemed so grand, making the bustling laborers look like insignificant specks beneath its vast, looming presence. Elara pushed through the chaos, desperation of taste in her mouth. She had followed Caleb, desperate to stop him, to make him see. She spotted him near the front of the line, overseeing a team of workers. His face was grim, his movements jerky, driven by an unseen fever. With a raw cry of anguish, Elara lunged toward a newly laid section of track, grabbing a loose spike, determined to tear it up, to break the relentless chain. Caleb spun around, his eyes wild with fury. "Elara, what are you doing?" He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, his face contorted in a mask of anger and fear. "Get out of here, you'll ruin everything. This is important. This is for everyone." But Elara saw past the anger, to the raw terror beneath, the fear that his grand design would be shattered. The monster, silent and immense, loomed over them now, its form ever shifting, a constant oppressive weight on the air, on the valley, on Elara's very soul. The air cracked with a malevolent energy, thick and suffocating. The final push was almost complete. The valley, once pristine, was now a jagged wound of churned earth and gleaming steel. The monstrous, indistinct form in the sky had intensified, becoming ever more dominant, a living, breathing storm cloud of grief and destruction. Its sheer scale was mind-numbing. It filled the valley, its agony being manifest, stretching beyond the visible horizon. It was a colossal, tormented, primeval figure of mist, smoke, and shattered earth. Then, with a deafening clang that echoed through Elara's very bones, the last rail segment connected. A profound, unearthly silence descended. Those with a primal connection to the land could perceive. It resonated through the ground, that shook their teeth, their skulls, their very souls. The unnatural fog thickened, becoming almost solid, coiling around the desolate landscape like a living shroud. For a terrifying, fleeting moment, the monster's form solidified. It was a colossal, tormented, a primeval figure, impossibly vast, broken. Black tears, thick as oil or tar, streamed down its indistinct face, its features shifting, dissolving, then reforming into a horrifying, amorphous entity of raw, suffering power. It was the utter desecration of the land's soul made manifest. It was insanely big, dwarfing everything, casting an eternal shadow over the desecrated valley. Caleb stood frozen, his eyes wide and vacant. The soundless scream, the overwhelming presence of the monster, shattered something within him. He began to speak, but the words were nonsensical, mechanical terms rattling from his lips. He clutched his head, muttering about infinite lines and perfect connections, his eyes reflecting the emptiness of the ravaged land. The architects of this relentless progress had built their new world on the ruins of their own minds. Days, perhaps weeks later, time had lost its meaning in the valley. The railway was complete, a gleaming monument to human ambition, connecting these directly to the coastal port, but the valley itself was eerily silent. The unnatural fog, thick and persuasive, never truly lifted, a perpetual shroud on the wounded earth. The air was cold, even in the midday sun, carrying the scent of damp earth and something indefinable, a faint metallic tang mixed with the lingering scent of decay. Elara was alone. Caleb was gone, lost to his madness. Institutionalized in a distant town, or perhaps simply wandering, his mind irrevocably broken. His name, when she whispered it, felt like ash on her tongue. The monster was always present now, a constant, oppressive presence on the horizon, a vast, looming shadow of mist and sorrow. It did not attack, it did not rage, it simply was, an unmoving, colossal testament to what was lost, a permanent burden on the landscape, a reminder of the life that had been so ruthlessly killed. Its very existence was the ongoing horror. From the distance, Elara could still hear the faint sounds of industrial progress. The rhythmic chug of a passing train headed towards the distant port cities, the clang of hammers from new timber mills and rail yards. But these sounds, once symbols of humanity's boundless potential, were now tinged with a hollow, dead quality to Elara. They were the sounds of a hollow victory. The trees were silent, the leaves seemed to sag with an unseen burden. The few birds that remained sang with a muted, mournful tone. The river, though still flowing, seemed to carry a darker, heavier water. The world had changed irrevocably. The price of progress had been paid, and the receipt was a silent, unending grief that now hung over everything. Elara sat by a dying fire, its embers casting flickering shadows across the weathered lines of her face. Decades had passed since the great unraveling, since the railway had laid bare the soul of the earth. Her hair, once a color of rich earth, was now a stark white, pulled back in a simple braid. Her eyes, however, still held the clear, knowing gaze of the wild, though now they were tinged with a profound sadness. They built cities, she rasped, her voice weary but resolute. Each word a stone dropped into a well of sorrow. They spanned continents with iron. They connected the world, they said. But they murdered the heart of this world to do it. They silenced the ancient song for the screech of the locomotive, for the clang of the hammer, for the hiss of steam, for the hollow promise of endless growth. She paused, staring into the embers, seeing not fire, but the endless, unblinking presence on the horizon. The monster. It's still there, always. A vast, unmoving testament to the crime. It doesn't hunt, doesn't rage. It simply is. An unmoving, colossal burden on the landscape. A constant, horrifying reminder of what was killed. It's the ghost of a dying god, haunting the world humanity created. Her voice grew quieter, a whisper almost lost to the stillness of her deep isolation. And now the silence is growing. The wilderness fades, yes, but sometimes within us it fades too. We are deafened by our own clamor, blinded by our own ambition. They build their iron veins across the world, but they drained its lifeblood, and the cost is eternal. She shivered, pulling her worn shawl tighter across her shoulders. The monster is not just outside anymore. Its silent emptiness begins to echo within the human spirit. They build their empires, they lose their very essence. It's this endless echo of a dying world. Her eyes, ancient and knowing, looked into the gathering darkness, seeing the vast, silent shadow that would forever mark the horizon above the clear-cut lands of Oregon. The listener was left with the haunting question: was the progress truly worth the eternal price? What silence, she wondered, would finally